Hi there, I'm Tom Trainer, Director of Marketing at Wrike, and we're here today with Nir Eyal, and he's the author of Hooked, and we're here to talk to him about this great book. So thanks for coming.
Good to be here.
So can you tell me a bit about yourself and about the book?
Sure, yeah. So my background is in advertising and gaming, and let's face it, these are two industries that are dependent on mind control. And I learned a lot about how to change user behavior, right? Advertisers don't spend all that money for their health. Game designers build their games to change people's behaviors and to make sure that they keep playing. And I learned a lot of amazing techniques on how to change people's behaviors. And so what I wanted to do through this book, Hooked, was to bring these techniques out to everyone so that people building all sorts of products that can help improve people's lives can use these same principles of consumer psychology to hopefully build products that help people live happier, healthier, more connected, more productive lives.
Okay, great. Can you tell me about the Hook model?
Sure, yeah. So the book is it's predicated based on this Hook model that I've developed that I found in my years of research is endemic to all sorts of habit-forming products. So if you look across all the products that capture your attention, the stuff that you just can't stop checking every day, your email, Facebook, Twitter, any of this the software that keeps drawing us back in, both online and offline, there's offline examples as well, you'll find a hook. And a hook is this four-step process that connects the user's problem with the company's solution with enough frequency to form a habit. And we can talk about the four steps, but big picture, it's a trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks that customer preferences are changed, that our tastes are formed, and that these habits take hold.
Okay, great. And why is it so important for people to be interested in this or to pay attention?
Habits are big business, frankly. And so if you're making a product, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a product designer, if you're someone who touches product, who touches the customer experience, then you have a say in terms of bringing people back. And so, I'm hard pressed to think of businesses that wouldn't benefit greatly by increasing user engagement. And until now, how to do that has kind of been a shot in the dark, right? I know, let's go talk to our customers and hear what the loudest ones tell us to build. No. Let's ask our investors what we should build. No, we should build what the highest paid person in the room says we should build. All of which are really crappy ways to build software. In fact, what you should do, not just software, any experience, in fact, what you should do is look deeper than what customers can tell you they need, because as we all know, customers are liars. They can't tell you what they really want. They're not capable of telling you what they really want. So instead, we have to look deeper than just their articulatable needs and understand our customers better than they understand themselves. And to do that, I propose we turn to the tenets of consumer psychology.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And can you give me some examples of companies that do this really well?
Sure. I mean, so if you think about all the products that you can't put down, whether it's watching sports, whether it's checking up on news or stock prices or Facebook or checking email or an Instagram account or any number of other products that I think have really mastered the art of habit formation, you'll see that these companies depend upon unprompted user engagement. They depend upon people coming back on their own without having to send them expensive advertising, without relying on spammy messages. People are coming back to these products on their own. And in fact, these companies I just mentioned, right, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, they would go out of business if it wasn't for the habits. Their business model depends upon habits or they're sunk. And so I think that we can use the same exact techniques that these companies use to keep people coming back for all different types of products and services.
Makes sense. Can you tell me about some examples of offline companies who've done this?
Yeah, so if you think about what makes spectator sports so habit-forming, that's a great example of a habit-forming product. I mean, I'm actually not a big fan of watching sports. I'm not a big sports fan, but I tell you what I am a fan of. I love watching people watch sports. Because if you go into a sports bar during a big game, and you attempt to turn off that TV, you're going to get lynched, right? You are going to get shot trying to do that. Well, why? What is it that's so amazing about watching spectator sports? Turns out that watching spectator sports also has these hooks. And so I detail in the book, I mostly look at tech examples. That's kind of my background, being in the tech industry, and that's where most of my clients come from. But we see these hooks in all sorts of different offline and online experiences.
So can you walk us through an example of a habit-forming product?
Sure. Let's take an online product. Let's say Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, any number of these other services. Let's take Facebook, for example, first to mind. when you think about what makes a product like Facebook so habit-forming, you'll find that there's this hook built into the product. And a hook has 4 steps: a trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment. And I can walk you through these 4 basic steps. Every hook starts with a trigger. A trigger tells us what to do next. The ultimate goal of a habit-forming product is to create an association, a mental link with these internal triggers. And these can be situations, routines, places, people, but most frequently they're emotions. And not just any emotion, they're negative emotions. So what we do when we're feeling bored or lonesome or lost or indecisive, what we do when we feel these negative emotions dictates the technologies we turn to with little or no conscious thought. So in the example of Facebook, well, when you're feeling lonely, that's when you check Facebook. When you're feeling bored, that's when you go online and check this app. Then comes the action. The action is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. And the company's goal is to make that behavior as simple as possible, to decrease as many steps to get to the reward as they possibly can. So in the case of Facebook, it's open the app and start scrolling. As soon as you start scrolling, what happens to your boredom? What happens to your loneliness? Well, all of a sudden, you feel connected, right? You're a little bit entertained.
That's right.
And they do this because of this principle of variable rewards. So variable rewards comes from the classic work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. You might remember from your Psych 101 class, right? Operant conditioning. So Skinner took these pigeons, he put them in a little cage, he gave them a disc to peck at, and every time they pecked at this disc, they would receive a reward, right? So he could train these pigeons to basically peck at the disc whenever they were hungry. But then Skinner did something different. He added this variable reward. So sometimes the pigeons would peck at the disc, but nothing would come out. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. So what does that have to do with the products we use? Well, it turns out that this variable reward, this slot machine-like mechanic of searching for the next piece of information, the next thing that I'm looking for, turns out to be at the core of all sorts of habit-forming products, whether it's spectator sports, right? Figuring out who's going to win the match or what's going to happen next in the game is variable. Online, scrolling through your newsfeed, looking for that interesting thing is this endless search, this variable reward that keeps us coming back time and time again. And then finally, the last step of the hook is the investment phase. The investment phase is something that increases the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. So it's either done by storing value, either data, reputation, content, followers, something that makes the service better with use. So for example, when you post a photo to Facebook, when you like someone else's post, when you comment on something, you're giving Facebook data about what you like. And of course, that feeds into the service and informs what you will see in the future. You make the service better and better with use. What this also does is it loads the next trigger. It makes it more likely for you to come back because now the company has a reason to reach out to you and bring you back with some kind of external trigger that you yourself prompted, right? So when you liked something or commented on something, that's a reason for the company to then send you a message to say, hey, the thing that you commented on, somebody else also commented on, or so-and-so also liked. That prompts them to send you an external trigger, which of course sends you through the 4 steps of the hook once again.
It makes a lot of sense. So one of the things you talk about is viral cycle time. So how does that fit into this model?
Yeah, so everybody in the Valley wants their product to go viral, right? I'm almost sick of hearing this word viral, right? Every app's got to go viral. But viral is not good enough. Because if you think about it, if one person tells another person about your app or your service, well, technically, if they've told more than one person about your product or service, that product's technically gone viral. You've got a K-score above 1. But that's not good enough. Because if that's only happening once every few months, maybe once a year, you're never going to get that hockey stick growth chart, right? And that's what people really want. When they say they want a product to go viral, what they mean is they want exponential growth. But you're never going to get exponential growth unless that viral cycle time, the amount of time it takes from one person to tell more than one person about a product or service, is very short. And that only happens with products that are used frequently enough to become a habit.
Okay, that's great. And then you mentioned in the book an example of Zynga. So Zynga had gotten the hook model down really well. Then what happened?
Yeah, this is a great question. So that I get this question all the time. You say variable rewards. We just talked about how important variable rewards are. Well, aren't video games full of variable rewards, right? And yet, We're not playing Pac-Man anymore. Nobody's playing Super Mario Brothers or Farmville. What happened? How come we're not playing these games? Well, what happened, and Zynga's a great case study in this example. What did Zynga release after Farmville? Remember, did you used to play Farmville?
You know, I didn't play Farmville, but
maybe your kids or maybe
something similar to Farmville. I remember.
Yeah, it was the fastest growing game in history at the time. Everybody was playing Farmville, and then after Farmville came, I think it was Chefville, and then Cityville,
right,
and then Frontierville, and the nextville, and the nextville, and what was once variable became predictable. And so that's an example of a finite variability, right? So an experience that the more you interact with it, the more predictable it becomes. And that's the trouble with finite variable rewards, is that, you know, when the mystery's gone, there's no more engagement. So for example, very few movies will we go watch more than once. Very few books do we, you know, get to the end and say, oh, I'm going to read the whole book once again. There's some examples. Maybe you'll read my book more than once. I don't know. Probably not. Why? Because we know the answers. We know the happy ending at the end of the fiction book. We know how the movie's going to wrap up. There's a few cult classics, which I think are the exceptions that prove the rule. But by and large, these businesses are studio models. Movie studios, book publishing houses, video game studios. They always have to crank out new, because they're so dependent on variable rewards. As soon as the product becomes predictable, users aren't engaged anymore.
So let's talk about email for a second. So people love to complain about email, but yet we're always in there. So does email hook us?
Email, I think, is probably the mother of habit-forming technology. And if you analyze email through the hook model, you'll see why email is so powerful and so persistent of a technology that yet not many of us really like anymore, right? It used to be novel, and I actually talk about this in the book, about how many of these habit-forming technologies, they start out as vitamins, they start out as these things that people use because they're seeking entertainment, it's interesting, it's novel, but then as they become habit-forming, they become painkillers, they become something we have to use whether we like it or not. And email has definitely taken that path, where, you know, when You've Got Mail was something that we heard when we first had America Online during the dial-up days. It was exciting, it was fun, it was novel because, you know, it was relatively new at the time. But now it's become, you know, a ball and chain. Now it's something we have to check whether we like it or not. And if you think about the 4 steps of the hook, the internal trigger to check email, well, there's plenty, right? There's boredom, there's anxiety, there's insecurity about what I'm doing in my job. All of these internal triggers, all of these painful emotions can be satiated a little bit by checking our email. Okay, so that's the internal trigger. The action, well, as it's become more ubiquitous to carry our digital technologies in our pockets, opening up an email app couldn't be easier, right? It's always with us. Now we have these wearable technologies, it's even easier to do. So the action has gotten consistently easier and easier. Now the variable reward. Well, there's tons of variable rewards in email, right? There's all kinds of is it something interesting? Is it something mundane? Is it something important? Is it something that's just spam? High degree of variability that I can only satiate those itches. I can only answer those questions if I open my email app. And then the investment, of course, is every time I reply to an email, I'm loading the next trigger because I'm likely to get a response. And that response is an external trigger prompting me through the hook once again. And that's why email is such a tough habit to break.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's why it's so hard to get away from email. So now, once you know something really well, when you look around the world, you always probably see the mistakes. So tell me about the mistakes that you see a lot of companies doing all the time related to the hook model.
Well, I think the first realization and the message I'm trying to preach out there is that engaging products don't happen by mistake. That Zuckerberg didn't just get lucky, that the Twitter guys didn't, you know, stumble on this stuff, that the Instagram guys, they knew what they were doing. In fact, if you look at Reid Hoffman, if you look at the founder of LinkedIn, or if you look at the Instagram guys, many of them were in fact symbolic systems majors at Stanford, and symbolic systems is this major that combines computer science and psychology. So they know a lot about user behavior. They know what will make people click and what makes people tick better than their customers know themselves. And so that's the first thing to do. The first thing is to understand that this doesn't happen by mistake. This doesn't happen by a happy accident, that we have to understand how these principles of consumer psychology work so that we can deploy them in our product. So that's the first step, is to understand that there's a methodology that's better than, hey, what do you think we should build? What should the next feature be? I don't know, let's build what sounds good, let's take a vote. No, no, no. Actually, you should run it against a model, and I propose the hook model, to figure out where might your product be lacking. So that's the first step, is to figure out how does your habit-forming product rank on these 4 basic steps in the hook model.
In your book, you talk about the habit zone. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why people would care about that?
Right. So it's very important to make sure that if you're building a habit-forming product, that the behavior occurs with sufficient frequency. And this is probably the number one bearer of bad news, is when I see a company that wants to build a habit, but the habit does not occur with sufficient frequency. There's a lot of science that shows us that it's very difficult to change a consumer habit if the behavior does not occur within a week's time or less. So you've got to find a way to engage the user within a week's time or less, or it just becomes very, very difficult to change that behavior. So frequency is a big deal. Now, of course, when we think about some of the products we talked about earlier, Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram and WhatsApp, these products are used multiple times a day, right? They're intraday habits. So of course they have a very high habit-forming potential. So a question I frequently get is, okay, that's great, Nir, but my product's not used very frequently. What do I do? I gave a talk in front of 700 real estate agents a couple months ago at a real estate convention. And the woman who hired me to give the talk asked me to come on stage, and then she proceeds to introduce me, and she says, now we're going to hear from Nir Eyal, the author of Hooked. He's going to teach us how to make home buying and selling into a habit. And I said, the first thing I said when I got up there is, no, I won't, because home buying and selling will never be a habit. It doesn't occur frequently enough, and it's not a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. It's the opposite of that behavior, right? It's a behavior that we do with a ton. We overthink when we have to buy or sell at home. So I gave my workshop. That's what I was hired to do. And at the end of the workshop, a few agents came up to me and said, I know what my habit's going to be. One woman said to me, look, I'm going to form a habit around this internal trigger of financial insecurity. Whenever someone in my neighborhood feels stressed about money, their kid's college fund, their retirement account, the gyrations of the stock market, I want them to call me. I want them to get in that habit a couple times a day if they need to call me whenever they have questions about their finances. So that when that customer is ready to buy or sell a house, guess who they're going to call? So the strategy, if your company doesn't have a product itself that's habit forming because it isn't used frequently enough, then you've got what I've seen so far is 2 options, which is to bolt on a habit forming product like either content, which is why we see this rise in content marketing today, which is exactly what this is right now. And we also see the bolting on of community. So if you can bolt on a community of like-minded people so that the ultimate result of engagement with your product, with your brand, whether it's a community or content, will be monetization. So that's kind of the mantra, is monetization is a result of engagement.
That's interesting. So one of the parts of the model is about investment. So what are some ideas for people to get more investment, their users to invest more in their products to become more habit forming?
Right, so there's a few forms of investment. It can be giving the company data that it makes the service better over time. So if you think about Mint.com or Pinterest, these companies ask you for data, little bits of data, both passively and actively, that the more you put that data into the product, the better and better it gets for you. You can build reputation. So if you think about Upwork or Airbnb or eBay, your reputation score makes the product more valuable to you. And even if a competing service were to come along, you're not going to switch because you've already stored this positive reputation in this platform. You can have followers. So if you think about a platform like Twitter, the more followers someone has, the better the site becomes as a way to reach your audience. And so it becomes more difficult to leave after you've got a big follower count. And what did I miss? Content. So the more content you add to a site, the more documents I put in my Google Drive, the more it becomes my one and only cloud storage solution. So those are our 4 easy ones. Skill can also be another one. So if somebody spends a lot of time learning your software, for example, this is why people keep using Photoshop. Even when there's better solutions out there, people keep using these tools because they've learned it. They've spent so much time on the investment of being proficient in these services.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And in your book, you talk about an example of where someone tried to do a clone of Twitter, and it's just so hard to compete against it when everyone's got their followers and they're used to it. And
by the time the habits take hold, this is the thing that I think a lot of bright-eyed entrepreneurs don't realize, is that the best product doesn't have to win. I've never seen any 11th commandment that says the best product wins. Have you?
I haven't seen that yet.
I haven't seen that. And it turns out that it's not necessarily the best product that wins. I mean, if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, there's graveyards full of companies that died with better products. Because frequently it's the product that has the mind monopoly, the product that's first to mind. Not necessarily better, but first to mind that succeeds.
Yep, that's right. And so in your, what I like to do is ask people about the future too. So what's a big trend that you see that you think people aren't thinking about or talking about enough?
Yeah, so something I've written about recently is a trend around what I call assistant as app. So assistant as app is when a company wipes out the interface, or the traditional interface, like a dashboard, and substitutes it with a text, what looks to be a text conversation. So some people call this conversational commerce. There's a few different takes on this topic. And I see a lot of companies, particularly in the enterprise space, I think there's a lot of opportunity to help users get over this dashboard fatigue, right? We don't want to learn more dashboards. So what companies are doing is they're integrating human beings with an AI on the back end so that you're texting with somebody that appears to be a human being, but actually it's partially an AI. So what's going to happen, the macro trend in the future, is that we know where this is going, is that right now it's mostly human interaction with a little bit of AI, but over time it's going to be less and less human and more AI over time. And that's when you can scale something like this from one rep serving 10 customers to 100 customers to 1,000 customers as the AI becomes more and more powerful, and it becomes much, much easier to use. Therefore, we can pass people through the 4 steps of the hook cycle faster by decreasing the effort. So when I want something, some kind of marketing automation or whatever it is that I want to do, where I would have to go to a complicated dashboard before, now I just ask for it. And the bot plus a human gets it done for me.
Oh, interesting. Have you seen any companies doing this yet?
Yeah. So full disclosure, I'm an investor in a company called Pana, which does this in the travel space. It's beautiful. You think you're communicating with a human being all the time, but actually it's a robot plus a human being, and they do everything travel related. So the other day, I forgot to give an airline my frequent flyer information after I flew a transcon flight. So I wasn't going to call United and sit there on the phone and wait for them to give them my frequent flyer number. I just typed it in, and they took care of it. Now, maybe that was a human being who did it. Maybe it was an algorithm. I don't know. I don't really care. I know in the future it's going to be less and less human and more programmatic. There's another company called X.AI that does something similar, but in personal scheduling. So if you want to schedule time with me, I'll send you to an email address called Amy. And Amy is an AI that will book a time by looking at my calendar. And when I tell people it's a bot, they don't believe me because they really can't tell the difference. And so I think we're going to see a lot of these assistant as app services in all different kinds of industries. And I'm really looking forward to it. I'm investing in it as well. So if anybody knows of a company doing this, let me know.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks for telling me about that.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming in and talking with us. And this is your book, Hooked. And where can people find out more about you and your book? And
yeah, so my website is Nir and Far. Nir is spelled like my first name, N-I-R, nirandfar.com. And the book is called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and it's available wherever books are sold.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Pleasure.